You're watching Trading Day on BNN Bloomberg. I'm John Ehrlichman. This week, Donald Trump returned to the White House, and the U.S. president has been quite clear. Canada should prepare for the possibility of tariffs, perhaps as soon as February 1st. We've been monitoring Canada's preparations for that threat. And while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has urged his provincial counterparts to be ready to fight back, Danielle Smith has stood out as a premier who strongly prefers a different approach, focusing on finding common ground with the president. Now, Smith has already engaged in diplomacy, both in Washington and also spending some time with Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort. She is back in Alberta and joins us now. Premier Smith, thanks very much for making some time for us.
My pleasure.
First off, you've had another busy week with your diplomacy efforts. How would you describe the talks you've been having with officials in the U.S.? How are those going?
Well, it's very friendly. I mean, I think for good reason. We have this longstanding, excellent trade and business and political relationship with the United States. And sometimes they just need to be reminded of just how important that relationship is, how mutual benefit happens as a result of us being able to sell so much product to the U.S. that they upgrade and refine, and then we buy back. It's an equal relationship. And I think that there are always these moments where we're going to have skirmishes, but you got to keep the conversation open, and that's what I've been doing. And
so as you're having those conversations, where are you finding the most common ground? Let's start with the positive part.
Well, I was watching with great interest the confirmation hearings for Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, and all of the problems that were identified, Alberta is the solution for, and Canada is the solution for. We know that the Americans want to be able to maintain lower prices for energy. Well, Canada ended up exceeding Saudi Arabia in the amount of oil that we exported to the U.S. as recently as 2014, and that's continued. When you get discounted Canadian oil, that is great for American consumers. But more broadly, we're beginning to see this battle shape up for artificial intelligence dominance. And I think there's grave concern that if the U.S. and its allies do not win that race against China, what kind of world would that create? Well, we're the answer to that, too. So many of the critical minerals that the Americans need in their supply chains come from Canada, whether it's going to be helium or germanium or even uranium. And so I think that we've got a very broad and good story to tell about how we can help the Americans achieve their goal of energy and AI dominance. And that's the message that I put forward.
You mentioned that word battle. It comes to mind with the Prime Minister's push to see premiers on side with a plan to retaliate if needed. Can you lay out what you think ultimately happens under that kind of scenario, if that ultimately is Canada's approach?
Well, I always tend to look at the positive, because the president said he was going to be bringing in tariffs day one. We got a reprieve. I hope that we're going to be able to continue that reprieve. That's why I've taken the approach of trying to identify the areas of common interest that we have. I think anyone can look at previous skirmishes that have happened in the past and the proportional response that Canada has taken. I would presume that there would be a proportional response this time as well. But my objective is to try to avoid tariffs altogether. That's why I've been doing so much work, because I don't think it benefits American consumers, and it certainly doesn't benefit Canadians or Americans if we get into a protracted trade and tariff dispute. So at the moment, we've been able to avoid that, and I hope we can avoid that for some time longer.
Well, and it just, from the outside, it seems like such an area of uncertainty, and perhaps if we knew exactly where tariffs might be targeted, there would be less uncertainty. At this stage of the game, can you give us your best understanding on how the tariff story might play out, and in particular with energy? Do you anticipate our oil being targeted by the U.S.?
Well, I know some of my colleagues like to negotiate these things in public. I tend not to want to. I think that any kind of proportionate action is something that you have to do after the fact. And we don't have tariffs from the United States first. And so we're certainly not going to take any action until we see what those look like. I think it very much depends on what the Americans do. And that's part of the reason why I think we have to make a very strong case about how it is that we are a partner. What I'm hearing the U.S. president say is that he's frustrated that we're not pulling our weight when it comes to national security and defense of North America, and in particular our Arctic. We got to fix that. He doesn't believe that we're pulling our weight when it comes to border security. I don't think that they want to see a bunch of migrants that they remove coming to Canada and biding their time to sneak back in at some future point. We have to give them confidence that that's not going to happen on our border. So I think in some ways we're having a tariff dispute. In some ways we're having a trade dispute. But in other ways, I think it's a bigger conversation. And that if we can address those concerns, then we might be able to go back to talking about trade and our ongoing relationship, making it tariff-free. But I think we haven't, what I'm seeing with the continuous threats that we're seeing from the U.S. is that those issues haven't been satisfied to the satisfaction of the U.S. president yet. And I'd prefer to start working on those things rather than talking about retaliation.
All right. Let's talk about dialogue then. And obviously, you've had a chance to have a dialogue with the president as well. How would you describe your relationship with President Trump?
Look, I've had a chance to go to a lot of social gatherings. As you probably know, the way your system of government works is you're not allowed to have formal talks or negotiations until you have the secretaries that have been formally confirmed through the Senate process. And so I was down in the U.S. as well as going to Florida to be able to begin making the diplomatic relationship, putting it off on the right track so that we can continue having those conversations. I've got, I think, a pretty good relationship with Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. Had a chance to meet with Chris Wright. Have had a chance to meet as well with Mike Waltz. And I'm really hopeful that those relationships and talking about our shared interest is going to be able to allow us to continue having a constructive conversation. But we're still awaiting the completion of that confirmation process. But I'll be spending a lot of time in America over the next number of months. I'll be coming down to a joint meeting with my other premiers on February the 12th. I'll be down for the National Governors Conference. I've been invited to join the Council on Energy Security, which will be meeting at that time. I'll be back for CERA Week, which is a major conference in Houston, talking about the Alberta story and how we can assist the Americans in achieving their energy dominance goals. So I have a full court press plan for the next number of months.
Okay, Premier Smith, appreciate you making some time for us. Thanks.